Welcome to Go with the Workflow, where we interview world-class leaders in legal and experts in workflow automation to learn from their hard-earned experiences in making work more efficient and more meaningful. Today, my guest is Saren Chum. Saren is the Senior Manager of Legal Contract Operations and Digital Transformation at Align Technology, a global medical devices company that owns well-known brands like Invisalign. Saren has spent over a decade supporting Align's legal department, starting as a contract admin, moving into legal operations for contracts, and now looking after a much broader digital transformation effort together with Workflow. Now, what's really exciting about having Saren on this episode is she hasn't just bought Workflow Automation, she's an actual hands-on user of it and leads the efforts behind a global organization, so she brings a very valuable perspective that I'm excited to share with you. She also makes a mean fried rice, so I've heard, though I'm yet to have the privilege to try it myself. On this episode, we talk about the workflows Align have built and why they've chosen to build some of these in a workflow tool instead of a CLM. We get into the details on what the day-to-day might look like for someone who is leading a no-code workflow program, the early journey, the different stakeholders you work with, and how to best leverage your vendor. We also talk about the importance of early success, getting buy-in, and even get an understanding of what a hackathon might look like and why it can be a powerful tool for adoption and scaling. It was such a fun conversation, and I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Saren, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Evan, for having me. I'm excited for this workshop.
Awesome. Well, Saren, let's start with your career, because I think you've had a pretty interesting background into legal ops. You haven't always been in legal, right? So, but you've always had a focus on process and operations. So, tell us a little bit about your story, how you ended up in the position that you are today.
Sure, Evan. But before I share the story about how I got here, I'd just like to talk about a little bit about my current responsibilities and how the experience and skills I learned from my previous roles helped me transition into my current role. So my main objective in my role is, to manage the contracts process for the legal department, either to implement or provide guidance on ways to simplify, streamline, and automate our processes. Right? Our goal is to reduce unnecessary touch points, whether leveraging the current tools that we have in place or updating our policies and giving us the capacity to scale. So how did I get here? Right. So before I aligned, I worked in HR and sales. And I actually worked for Align in the HR department about 13 to 14 years ago, and then moved into sales before coming back to Align and joining the legal department. In my HR and sales role, I helped redesign processes, and when I was in sales, I helped redesign their company website. In both areas, the focus was on the user experience and journey, streamlined workflows, processes, and design, which are all transferable to what I do now in legal. And I'm just continuing to build upon those skills and experience.
That's really cool. I didn't know that you were previously because you've been at Align for more than 10 years now in the legal role,
Yes.
Right? But you were at Align, you're saying,
as an HR, yeah.
Before, oh, wow.
Yeah, about 13, 14 years ago, I was filling in for someone who was going on maternity leave.
Yeah.
So I was doing
That's
HR
cool.
for a little bit,
That's cool.
with the line, and they just, kept my information. And when this role opened up for legal, they contacted me to see if I was interested.
Oh wow! You must have done a good job if they're doing a callback. So
yeah,
good on you. All right, that's interesting.
I'm glad they did.
yeah, no, of course. And yeah, that's really good advice. And I know that you spent again 10 years in the legal department within Align, and you've gone from, I think you started out as a contracts admin, and then sort of stepped your way up through to sort of contracts manager, and then legal operations became part of your title, and then now you're looking at broadly digital transformation. So your role's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more strategic over the years. And I know today, this whole sort of podcast and webinar is around workflow. I mean, how much has workflow been a enabler or a sort of complementary um, event to sort of your growth in your career in the last few years? Because you obviously manage workflow now at Align, right? So how much of that has been aligned to your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's just build just existing workflows to building new workflows, right? I think as you're finding efficient, ways to streamline the process, like
Mm.
not only are you learning, but there's also takeaways, right, for the next time, like you're building a workflow. Like there's sometimes there's pain points along the ways, but there's also like winning areas as well, right? But just taking, the knowledge and just the background and just what we've learned and what you see that is working with the workflows, I think, and just taking that and being able to incorporate those, takeaways in your next build or your next solution, or, I think it's just, it helps.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you currently lead, as I said, the workflow automation at Align. But before we get into like the nitty gritty of what that looks like, to help people understand what we mean when we talk about workflow, like what are some of the workflows that you've seen being automated at Align, whether that's you personally, but I know it's a much bigger effort of many people now across the organization. But what have you seen? Like what workflows have come out of your work into Align?
Yeah, so like before we move forward, like with more information on like the workflows that we built, I just wanted to say that like before building anything, our team actually conducts like surveys and interviews with our business partners as well as legal, and ask for feedback, right? We ask what can be improved and what are some of the like pain points they're experiencing. We look at the volume of contract, we looked at the volume of each contract type and determine like what can be automated with like a self-service portal, or workflow. We also like pulled, metrics and analytics, and based on that data, to help us determine like whether we need to change like our processes or our policies or both, or build a workflow to help it. So with that said, we automated two. I want to showcase two that we automated and built through checkbox. The first process is our NDA workflow. We had somewhat of a lengthy and manual process when sending out our NDAs. It can sometimes take, a day or to a few days to get our NDAs signed by both parties. We were able to implement an automated self-service portal for our requesters, reducing the review and turnaround time. So we've seen, NDAs come back now through checkbox within minutes, like rather than like a day or even a few days. The second one that I wanted to highlight and showcase is a workflow that we built to help our business partners determine if their contracts require legal review, right? So we have like new employees, or sometimes we have business requesters that are not dealing with contracts often. So when they do have a contract in place, they're lost or they don't know if they need to pull legal in, right? So we call this solution the material contract detector. So basically the requester comes into um, an intake form and they answer a series of questions, and based on their questions, the detector will provide a result letting them know if they need to send their contract for legal review or bypass legal. So this basically helps legal, it helps remove legal from unnecessary reviews, or reduce legal touch points, and at the same time provide the business partners with the information they need.
Wow. Very good two examples. I like the two examples because I think NDA is often like the gateway into workflow. People understand the NDA and it's a good way to kind of get used to it. But then you kind of explained another one, which is it's contract related, but it's not really what you would consider contract automation because you're not generating an agreement in your contract
No,
material contract detector. You're just almost providing advice around where the legal team has drawn your risk threshold of what should go to legal and what hasn't, right? So it's more
right.
almost like it's again on the same line of creating more time for legal, but it's actually more sort of somewhere between contracts and advisory work.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, that's really interesting. Cool. And so those are two really great examples. And my follow up question is particularly for the NDAs, and I know that you've done other contracting work as well at Align with Workflow. I also know that you have a CLM, right? And there's always that question, and I think there's a confusion for sure in the market of when do you do your contracting work in a CLM versus doing contracting work in a workflow automation tool, right? You're a great case study of you have both. You have a CLM. In fact, you had one before bringing on workflow, but now you manage some of your contracting workflows in your workflow system, not your CLM. Like, can you share a little bit as to why that's the case? What's your decisioning there?
Yeah, so I think, we can all agree that like not all systems are 100% perfect, right? And can do everything that we need it to do. I mean, there are gaps, challenges, and sometimes like technical limitations. And sometimes there's, a better way to do something. Just because we have a CLM, it doesn't mean that we have to create everything in CLM if it's not efficient,
Hmm.
right? So, I mean, our CLM is the source of truth. We input all our contracts through there, but if there are certain contract types that can be self-service that doesn't require approvals, the different levels of approvals, we take those contract types out of our CLM tool and we try to automate that through checkbox, right? So that way the front end user journey is better for um, our business partners. The experience is, it's better for our business partners, but at the same time, it reduces the work from our from legal as well, right? So we have that automation through checkbox. Once it's fully signed, executed, then we will input that signed version into our CLM tool because it's the source of truth.
Got it. That's really interesting. I think I'm hearing that more and more. I think CLM does a fantastic job at the repository. And for the more sort of modern ones, they do a whole bunch of interesting AI analytics, contract analytics, intelligence. And they help a lot with, I think, heavily negotiated documents where you're um, sort of having an AI assistant perhaps to some of the redlining when it comes to playbooks and fallback clauses and clause libraries and the whole concept there. But what you're saying is if it's a uh, relatively low friction, low negotiated, it can be largely self-service contract, then it sits on the workflow side because it's just more flexible, easier to build, maintain, and the user experience is more natural.
Right, right.
That's
And
making
then,
yeah.
so, we do have a process where, for example, if the counterparty wants to redline our contract, then it will be processed through our CLM tool.
Yeah.
But if they accept the terms as is, they will just sign our, um, e-signatures and everything. E-signature processes through checkbox.
Yeah.
Just complete the whole process within there.
Very insightful. Okay, thanks for sharing that.
Welcome.
So I want to kind of talk about the journey now, like your role specifically in leading workflow in a global organization. And I didn't even ask actually, like how big is the Align business? It's a global business. Like how many potential business users can there be, and what's the size of the legal team? Because I think that gives everyone a sense of kind of
I don't
the
have the
scale
exact
that you operate.
So we're a global company. We're trying to expand, and train different members from the legal, and actually the quality regulatory assurance team falls under the legal department as well. We're trying to, just um, expand the learning and trainings within the legal now, but hopefully expand it to, align us globally.
Yeah.
But I
Did,
think I would say, I mean, we had a workshop in hackathon, and there was about 20 people who participated.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just in like the workshop that you ran,
Yeah.
that's not the whole team though, right? Like the legal
No,
team
that's not the
is,
whole team. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So
So
I
like
would,
what,
oh gosh,
I
I
won't
don't,
hold you to it. Like just guesstimation, back of
I would
napkin.
say probably about, gosh, over 100
Yeah.
legal representatives. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's helpful. I think if there's so many different size legal teams, it's sort of helpful to know what kind of scale we're talking about here. So 100 plus legal team. I think the Align business is in the tens of thousands of employees globally. So
Right. Hmm.
that's kind of what we're working with. So like, what does it actually look like then at the very, very beginning of implementing workflow, right? Because you were there at the very beginning. Like, help us understand what it's like going from zero, like absolutely nothing, to like something. Like, what does that look like when you first bring on workflow when you're implementing it?
Um, yeah. So, I mean, I think like at the beginning of any workflow before implementing it, right? We ask ourselves like, okay, what would we want the workflow to look like if we were able to design it in a perfect path, right? Perfect workflow. Um, we just have like a model, right? The diagram of like, okay, from start to finish, how would we want it to look? And then from there, we build it, according to like the capabilities, of course, and, functions of the tool.
Okay, very cool. And so at the very beginning, I imagine it wasn't sort of 100 plus legal team members involved. Like, what was that starting squad, if you will, and what sort of resources did you commit at the beginning, and has that grown over time? Like, how does that look like at the very beginning in terms of like people?
Yeah, so I think at the beginning there was a little bit of challenge, right? I think it's because the team didn't fully understand like the no code, low code concept, right?
Yeah.
The team was a bit, skeptical about the tool, and so therefore it was like challenging to get them to learn and even use the tool, right? So what I think, just to like showcase and educate like our legal team, we legal ops actually built a couple of workflows that was relevant to the legal team to showcase,
Mm,
right? So that way they can see how it impacts like their workload or how it can help resolve their pain points. So after we showcase, the first one was the NDA process. So after we showcase the workflow and how we show the back end of how to build, we show the front end of like the user experience and the user journey. Like I think that's when the legal team actually got excited about it. I'm like, oh, okay, now I understand what this is,
mm,
and it doesn't look hard to build. We don't need IT to help us build. I mean, there's certain things that still, I myself still need to learn, right? But for the most part, like 90% of the workflows you can do on your own, right?
yeah.
So now, after we showcased our first workflow, there was um, more interest and demand in building like solutions. And so now the challenge for us is not even like, trying to like win, like they're like, um, the challenge for us is, not having enough resources to meet the demand. Right. So we have started like
Yeah.
triaging like incoming solution requests based on like impact and urgency. But in parallel, like we're providing training to members within the legal team to help build, solutions, for their team and help, build workflows for their specific needs.
Yeah. I love that story. And it's so cool. Like I think there's a few nuggets there. Like first, is it really takes that first workflow to go live to show the art of the possible, and for something that, as you said, like not everyone understands the concept of workflow or low code, no code, but as soon as the first workflow goes out live, people feel it, touch it, see it, and they understand it, and then all of a sudden, like their imagination goes wild, and they realize, oh my god, we could use it for that and that and that, and it really does take that first thing to go out. And so I always recommend to people going on this journey, like pick something that isn't overly complicated. And I think that's why NDAs are overused, but still the first thing that people go to, because it's simple enough and it's understandable enough and it's high volume enough to have that internal PR that you need to then really get the wheels turning, right? And then I love the fact that it grew to the point where now the constraint isn't winning the hearts of
Yeah.
your stakeholders. It is actually like fielding all of the
Yeah.
requests that they have for the next workflow. That's a really cool story, and I've seen that happen time and time again with workflow. It's such a cool technology for that reason. And you mentioned that you had a hackathon recently. I want to talk a little bit about that. I think that's a really clever little like tool to use in proliferating sort of ideas within the organization as well, and sort of getting buy-in at scale, and reinvigorating perhaps a tool that may have been in the organization for a few years, because I know that you've been using workflow for a few years now. Like, tell me a bit about the hackathon recently. What did that entail? What did that look like? Who was involved? Yeah, just like, how does a hackathon work?
Yeah, so there was a lot of interest in checkbox, and so with that, I was getting a lot of just questions, right, from like cross-functional teams. There's questions from sales, from internal audit, just from different teams, reaching out, wanting to learn more about checkbox. And within legal as well, right? It was more from legal, like from the different regional teams. So we thought, let's have a hackathon, like a workshop, a 2-day workshop, where the first day consisted of just training, um, just showing the functionality. We had a checkbox representative kind of build out a workflow to show everyone how to build a workflow, go over the different functionalities within checkbox. The second day was the hackathon, where we sent after the first day, we sent the participants back with homework, right? And we asked them, think of something that is a pain point for your team or for you, and create a solution that you could think can help solve some of the pain points for your team. So they went off with the homework the next day. I was very surprised, actually. Some of the solutions that they created in one day was absolutely amazing. But yeah, so during the second day, we just asked for volunteers, to showcase what they built. And I was very surprised. Everyone was like really engaged and interested, and actually did their homework. We were a little bit nervous about it, but no, but it just showed, that this tool was so easy enough to use that they were able to do it in one day, build the workflow in one day.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Thanks for sharing that. And I know that um there was a lot of visibility. I know that Lynn, who is your like one of the VPs at Align, was also in attendance. I think he was there for the full 2 days, is what I heard, and was hands on and building as well. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just like your everyday attorney or legal ops. It went all the way up to the VP level, and he was super engaged, which was awesome.
Yeah. He has built I think a couple of solutions, just playing around with it
Yeah.
on his own time. Yeah.
That's so cool. I love it. I love it when like like deputy or associate general counsels and GCs and CLOs get their hands on these tools and actually get into the nitty gritty. It's really cool the fact that they can build
Yeah,
workflows.
our executive admin to our general counsel was also an attendee for the workshop.
Yeah.
So and she built this, intake form to help manage like what's coming through for our general counsel. So she was very ecstatic about checkbox as well. And I think she's certified, and I actually have a meeting with her tomorrow because she has more questions on it.
Very cool. Okay, and outside of the hackathon for a minute, what does your role look like day to day? Like when you're leading a workflow automation like effort at an organization, what do you do? Like, what's your role, responsibility? You just talked about like having to support someone tomorrow, with some of the questions on the build. Like, what is your day to day in this role?
So yeah, I play a lot of different roles in within checkbox, not just, I have like other responsibilities outside of checkbox, but within checkbox, I'm still involved with building and maintaining, some of the solutions, continuous improvements, right? But also I'm training, other members of the legal team, and also just like answering inquiries and questions from other members outside of the legal team, like from our cross-functional teams. Yeah, so I mean, it's all around providing guidance, providing advice. There was one where I had a corporate communication workflow that I built a sample, like a workflow, just to showcase how checkbox and how the workflow can help with their review process, like marketing review process, and they were happy with the workflow, and they want to build upon it. But I mean, it looked to them, it was like, oh, this is very easy to do, and it wasn't overwhelming or intimidating that someone on their team can just pick it up.
Yeah, very cool. And tell us about a bit about sort of the different stakeholders that you work with, right? As part of running this program, it's obviously a very cross-functional, as you just alluded to, cross-functional role. I'm assuming you're not just you're sort of like an evangelist internally for the tool. You're answering questions for the tool. You're building on the tool, but I imagine there's a whole bunch of work pre-technology as well around maybe gathering requirements around the business. You mentioned prioritization earlier. Like who actually are the stakeholders that you work with? How far up does it go? Like how far does visibility go in terms of like the CLO or maybe the VPs that we were just talking about earlier? Like who do you work with? IT maybe as a stakeholder.
Yeah, so since implementing checkbox, like I've worked with or have answered like questions related to checkbox, like to our cross-functional teams, like consisting of like IT, of course, corporate communications, sales, internal audits, attorneys, right? Of course, within the legal team. There's probably like a few others that I'm missing, but with the buzz going on with checkbox, like more and more teams are reaching out to me to learn about checkbox. But like with the material contract detector, like I think every workflow is unique, right? And different, and there's different stakeholders. So if I'm building, helping with for example, like there's a solution that we call, it's like the entity management portal. So that's like a different team that I work with, right? Which is like these corporate securities team. When I worked on the material contract detector, that's another set of individuals that I'm working with, right? So yeah, I'm just working, with different, cross-functional teams depending on the solutions that I'm building.
Mm-hmm. You must be one of the most popular people at Align. You go around and you help people solve problems that they just are so done with. So
Yeah, so like for example, like sales reached out to me. This was probably about over a year ago, but they basically like laid out like, their process, and I was able to tell them like, okay, well, I think you can do this, fill in this gap, or there's some workarounds, right? So, and with and that's the good thing about checkbox is that sometimes, like, I mean, they have existing tools that can, that they can reach out to their account managers or technical, account reps, and kind of like help ask for their support. But sometimes you have to pay more, right, in order for like to do custom changes or add
yeah.
more features or whatever it is, right? But with checkbox, I mean, that's the one good thing is like you can fill in those gaps with checkbox if needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a like the whole no code, low code part of it is about managing and maintaining internally, right? So those costs and the speed to delivery and the speed of change is all like within your own organization's
Yeah.
hands, right? So that's really cool. We talked a lot about like the success and like everything that's gone well, but like obviously it's not an easy journey. I can't imagine that to be the case. Like, what are some of the challenges that you've come across in sort of leading a workflow automation effort, and how did you overcome them?
Some of the challenges, I think we touched a little bit on it, where, at the beginning, right? Like we didn't have, our users were skeptical, right? I think more education, more communication on it, showing, showcasing, a workflow that is relevant, based on their role or their responsibilities. Like, I think those are key, um, important important steps to take to help them understand, so that way you reduce like the challenge, right? There's not, what is that word I'm looking for? I guess there's no more skepticism
Mm.
on, on using the tool.
Okay, so buy-in, I guess, at the very beginning was a challenge, um, and I guess that's related to change. And you're saying that education is sort of the main way that you got through it. I think before we mentioned as well, like obviously just getting to that first tool as soon as possible, and not being too because like you've done, like I think you have done a great job at Align in that your time to the first workflow was pretty quick. But I know that like working with so many different legal departments, sometimes as legal teams who might be entering phases like user acceptance testing, where you're really testing with end users,
Mhm.
um, we as I guess legal professionals are tend to be trained to be like perfectionists and get things right, and sometimes perfection is the enemy of progress, and so you're kind of making like these infinite version like 1.97, and then it never gets out, and then you never get to that like boom, like breaking
Yeah.
point that you talk about, right? So
Yeah. So my rule, and I mean, I think my team knows this too. It's like it's okay if it's not perfect, right? As long as it's 70%, 80%. And I mean, in some cases, maybe even 60%, right? Like depending on what it is, right?
yeah, yeah.
Just roll it out, because even though you think you need to make it perfect or you think it's perfect, when you roll it out, there's going to be more input, more
Mm,
feedback, more changes that you need to make. So, having it implemented, I think sooner rather than later, you can start, improving the process, streamline it, but, just continue collecting what needs to be changed, continuous improvement, right? So I always tell my team, like, let's get it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it's at least 70%, we're always, there's that always constant improvement that we'll need to make, constant change. So, and we can make it along the way. Yeah.
that's really good advice again. I think if you ask, like things can always be improved. I think people with a continuous improvement mindset understand that there's always ways we can improve, make things better. And so if you ask for feedback, it's important to understand it. It's easy to give feedback. It's almost so easy to like, oh, can you make it like this? Or like those requests can come very easily from people who aren't the people who have to implement it. And so I think having like a framework to understand what is like the must-haves versus the should-haves and the nice-to-haves, and having that bit of a framework
Right.
really helps, prioritize what is making up that 60-70% that you talk about, and what probably is that 30-40% that we could leave as a phase 2 or phase 3 after
Right.
we go to deploy. Yeah, so that's good. All right. So we talked about sort of you leading the efforts, who you work with, your day-to-day, some of the challenges. What's your relationship with your workflow automation vendor? Like, what do you do yourself, and what does your vendor do, and how do you like get the best leverage out of that relationship? I think that's also a really interesting point for many people who are working with legal tech vendors, not just in the workflow space, but there's definitely some nuances to workflow automation vendors. Like, how do you get the most out of that relationship? Who's doing what? What's the touch point? How often do you meet? Shed a bit of light on that.
Yeah, so we have a designated contact person that we meet with on a weekly cadence. And during our calls, we go through, any questions that my team has, like regarding their solutions, right? Regarding their apps that they're building. And we have, and we discuss like what's the best like approach to provide the best journey, for our business partners. So, I tell my team, build everything, build what you can, or, like just leave the questions for our checkbox representatives. Like if there's something that, like you tested it out on your own, you tried different options and it's still not working the way that you wanted, leave those questions for, our checkbox rep. The reason why I say that is because, she's only one person. And if we are asking her to look into every question that we have, it takes away from her being able to provide, answers to the very important questions, or, and then also, it's also learning, right? Like I like to figure it out first before I ask a question with anything I do. Like if, my manager asks me to do something, or even though I don't know the answer, I'm going to go and try to find the answer before I provide, answer his question, right? So at least like I looked into it. And the same thing for checkbox, right? You just have to play around with it, play around with functionalities, do a few different, scenarios, see what works. And then if it doesn't, then you reach out to your, checkbox contact person. And it's been very, successful. I mean, our weekly calls have been very helpful for our team. And we record our sessions. So like if we have to like go back and, we can go back and look at it if we, don't understand or still have additional questions.
Very
And
helpful.
then we also have, the good news now is we also have a support person in the same time zone. So that really helps a lot too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Last question for you. So much of legal ops is about achieving and improving processes and generating value. But a big part of it is also around being able to communicate that value, to be able to tell stories, right? And really, sort of take that value and make it visible. So what kind of stories and value have you been able to tell because of the work that you've done in workflow? Like what's the like go-to success story or ROI stats that you can share publicly?
Yeah. So I mean one of the values that I can, or ROIs that I can share with you is, I mentioned earlier, our NDA process, right? It was somewhat like lengthy and manual. And, just having, the signed copy can take a few days rather than, minutes with the new workflow. So, but since the rollout of like 2021, that's when we rolled out the internet, we automated close to like 800 NDAs for our North America and LATAM region. And because of that data, and we are expanding it, the same process to our EMEA region. Along with that, we are working with other contract types that can be self-service. So yeah, we're working currently on a couple of contract types within Checkbox with a similar workflow.
Yeah, very cool. I remember when it first went out, there was like a buzz all the way up to like your C-suite globally. It was
Yeah.
like, hey, we finally we solved the NDA.
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool to see that like project kind of make its way all the way up.
Yeah. And the thing,
visibility.
the thing is, like, when you roll out a new workflow or anything new, right?
Yeah.
You don't hear the positive, feedback but you always hear like what is wrong with it or what you can do better. And, but I mean, like with the NDA process, like we didn't really get any, negative feedback. So to me, I take that as good, right? Because you don't hear anything. Because you don't hear something if it's bad or if something goes wrong. Yeah. So
That's true. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really delightful conversation, and I love the depth that we've gone into. Hopefully, this was insightful for everyone who's listening live, but also listening post as well. But Saren, thank you so much for your time. You've been amazing. Congratulations on all the success so far, and I look forward to seeing all the other sort of workflows and stories in the future. And at some point, I will need to try that fried rice as well. Okay, now that I've heard about it.
yeah, you have to let me know when you're visiting, and then I'll definitely make it for you.
Winning. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks so much. And to everyone else, have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks, Saren.
Thank you, Evan, for having me. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Go with the Workflow. If you found it valuable, you can subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Spotify or Apple Podcast. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leave a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast too. That's all for now, so we'll see you at the next episode.